Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Creed 3. I think what works about the Creed franchise is it's able to take the Rocky franchise and kind of refurbish it, recontextualize it for a new generation with newer directors with different visions, but also incorporate that into what a Rocky movie is. And when Ryan Coogler made the first film, he was very open about how, if Rocky had come out now, it would play at Sundance, and he, knew how to make kind of like an indie. I mean, he made an indie hit movie, but he knew how to make like an indie boxing movie and how you would do it, and with the amazing one-er kind of tracking shots with the fights and everything like that. He knew how to make that kind of movie, and he did. And Creed is amazing because of that. Creed 2, I still like, and I think there's a lot of great moments in it, but it didn't feel as much as a recontextual, more of like a follow-up. It was still good. But Creed 3 does sort of a similar thing as the original film and takes a director's different vision and has fun with this franchise in a way that I really, really like. I think this is probably, of the Rocky Creed franchise, one of the best sequels this franchise has ever produced. Because what Michael B. Jordan, who is both Creed, Adonis Creed, and directs this, much like how Sylvester Stallone did. He hasn't written it yet, though, so he has to do that. But it's very in line that he would direct a Creed movie, much like how Stallone eventually directed Rocky movies. In this, he's very open about his anime influences, and you can see that throughout this film, even from the first fight where everything pauses and he very in slow-mo punches him, and it feels like almost unreal. And there's a couple fight scenes where they go into the surreal and the weird in this that I'm really not used to in the Rocky franchise, but I thought worked amazingly well. Particularly some of the frames in this felt like right out of an anime or right out of something that was animated. But if you think of Rocky, by the time you get to Rocky 3, that's where Mr. T shows up with Clover Lang, which I think this film has a lot in common with, to be honest with you. He connected it in a much, I think, a lot closer, a more intense way than the Clover Lang thing was. But still, they did it, and he kind of understood how silly and amped up and ridiculous this is, while also keeping it very personal. I think Michael B. Jordan's direction keeps that tradition alive almost as well as Coogler's does, but does it in a much more interesting way to think of, this is more of the Rocky 3, Rocky 4 ilk, where it gets ridiculous, where there's a ton of montages, but he understands how to amp up, and, there is a lot of cartoonishness in Rocky. That's always been a thing. Look at Rocky 4, and for someone to put anime influence, which is very much in there. I haven't watched a lot of the animes that he said influenced him, but I'm at least familiar enough to understand what was going on here, and it's quite amazing what he does. I'm actually really excited about him as a director. What this is about is Adonis Creed has become the heavyweight champion of the world. He does it in South Africa. He retires, hang out with his daughter, who's, we do learn she is deaf. That was hinted at in the last film. She is deaf. A lot of sign language in this film, which I gotta say, I actually quite like that, in a Hollywood movie, to incorporate it so well with the subtitles and everything. And I hope they burn the subtitles into the frame, because streaming does not do that a lot of times. But we'll see about that one. He's just hanging out with his daughter while his wife, played by Tessa Thompson, is producing, not performing live because of her hearing problems. But then his Jonathan Majors shows up, who's his friend when he was in foster care and juvenile detention, and he has just gotten out of jail for sort of taking a rap for him a long time ago, about 18 years ago, where he's in jail for 18 years. He's come out, and he was training to be a fighter but had to stop because he went to jail, and now he wants Creed to make him into a fighter. And through a series of events, which very much feels like he is manipulating the situation, this plays like an evil thriller where someone's come back to get their revenge on you as you have succeeded while they have failed. He gets to eventually become the heavyweight champion of the world, and almost has to fight Creed because he's done so much damage to Creed's life and the fighters that he's training, as Creed is now retired and is also training other fighters and thinking of the new generation and sort of becoming a promoter as well. And Jonathan Majors is there to sort of destroy it all because he hates Adonis Creed, wanted almost nothing to do with him when he got locked up. What's interesting about how Jonathan Majors and Michael B. Jordan work in this film is Jonathan Majors very much plays off of what Michael B. Jordan is doing, and Michael B. Jordan is being, he's very straight-laced. Jonathan Majors knows he can fuck with him, he knows he can mess with him. It's this very interesting dynamic. But what's also interesting is Michael B. Jordan did this in Black Panther to Chadwick Boseman, and I often thought when I saw that performance of Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan with Ricardo Montalban and William Shatner, and you have these two actors who know and like pinpoint each other's strengths and weaknesses, and you can tell like in Black Panther they were doing that, and you can tell in this film that they are doing that as well, and it is delicious to watch those kind of performances, because usually I will say whoever's playing the villain ends up being the more showy performance. You're almost like being a lead sometimes doesn't work out as well as you want it to, but it is like gives you like an amazing, wonderful supporting performance in this. And I really like Jonathan Majors. Like, I could see him playing an amazing villain in this. Not so much in that other movie I watched recently where he played Kang. It was like, okay, he's good, but this was like, whoa, he's amazing. Like, this is just, he was so good as it's like he totally got this kind of role. And it's interesting that like Michael B. Jordan, I would say before this movie, did one of the great performances like that, and it's interesting to see him be in the opposite position and directing it, and you could tell like he understood that dynamic very well, because he could both be the more straight-laced one, like I have a moral center, I represent something, I'm responsible, and Jonathan Majors is like, I will burn this shit to the ground because I need to get mine. And there is a real darkness in that. I do think that is one of the darknesses of humanity, the whole idea of like, I don't give a fuck about anybody, I give a fuck about me. And I think a lot of people find that to be really defiant, and I had a hard day, fuck all of you. But in the end, I think you ultimately know the true darkness in that. They're not saying like in this film very much plays off family, and I understand I have a family and stuff. I'm not necessarily saying that, but I'm saying like, Creed represents something, and he represents something to other people, and he is a gateway to other fighters, and he is kind of building something positive. Like in this film, you have all the other fighters he fought are in the background. Like this feels more like a cinematic universe of Creed than it felt like a cinematic universe attached to Rocky, although they mention Rocky a lot. Even though he's not in it, he gets a producing credit and characters by credit, because it's Stallone's whole thing with the Winklers, and that's a whole mess. Although I would say fix that, like let Stallone have a cameo now and then. I think it's annoying, but I think Michael B did a good job with that. And I also think like their reason for their rivalry has a real darkness to it that they get into further, and I don't want to get into because that would be a spoiler, but it goes throughout the whole thing. There's a real serious issue at the heart of this, which I think made this much more impactful. I quite like this movie. I don't think it is like, there's Creed and Rocky, and then there's like a bunch of sequels, but I would put this near the top, near like Rocky 3, which I think most people regard as one of the better sequels. I would put this like kind of maybe in my, I don't have a ranking, but like in the idea of my top 5 or something, because it got the sequelness of Rocky so well. I think some of that might have been because Ryan Coogler has a story by credit in this. Apparently he took a little more of an active role in this film than the second one, which you can sort of tell it's also written by Ryan Coogler's brother, or the screenplay credit by Keegan Coogler and Zach Balin, who Zach Balin wrote King Richard, but Keegan Coogler also wrote Space Jam: A New Legacy, so that's I think what this film at its heart, one of the things I really liked about Michael B. Jordan's direction, and I am a fan of him, I quite like him actually as a leading man, but his direction, like there's one part towards the end where he is wearing white trunks and white boxing gloves, and Jonathan Majors wearing black. I even heard people in the theater like, oh come on, that's like so lame. But I do think there's a sort of beauty in simplifying the visuals so you can fully understand what's going on. And I also think it leads to less of he's good and he's bad. It's more of he represents this and he represents that. And I did get that from this film. I do quite like there was one point where they're standing in two doors in the same frame, like Michael B. Jordan's in one and Jonathan Majors in another. And that's definitely something I'd see in an anime or a cartoon. Like there's a lot of the framing that was just there to like tell a story in the shots. Like they definitely used the cinematography in a much different way, and I gotta hand it to Michael B. Jordan on that, because it's very smart to understand that, you know, you have your montages that do the thing, and I don't think any of them can be shot anywhere. I mean, that's the thing. You're on the 9th film. These are, you kind of like, you know, they got to train, they got to do this, they got to do that. Some of these things, I don't know. I'm sure you're like, how else could I film it, motherfucker? Leave me alone. But like, at least in some of these shots, like he creatively thought of new ways, and it totally works and makes sense. I've heard the end fight is controversial in terms of how he shot it. I thought it was a great way to do that. I am much rather have an interesting fight, and I thought it was a really smart way to do it, actually. And I know it was anime influence, and that's not just why I like it. I like it because it was like really worked for like who they were and what their beef and arguments and like what the problem was. I like the little girl. I like Tessa Thompson. I really love this cast. I love following all of them in this family. I just think this franchise works very well at delivering me what I want. But what I was thinking about when I've rewatched some of the Creeds and the Rockies is I think superhero stuff is often called like wish fulfillment. Like you wish you could be Iron Man or Spider-Man or something like that. Or you look at those things, you're like, if I was in that role or something. I think the difference, because I think Rocky, you could be like, oh, he's a superhero, he's a cartoon. And I think that is definitely a part of these films. But I think mainly it's, I can achieve this thing. I can achieve my goal. I can get over this monumental thing that looks like nearly impossible, that everyone says I cannot do. And I think a lot of that goes into the Norman Rockwellism of the American dream, or the myth of the American dream, or whatever you want to call it. The idea of that, like everyone said I couldn't do this, and I worked very hard, and I trained, and I fucking did it. And I don't know if I believe in the American dream necessarily, but I sort of believe in the format of these movies. And like, it does make me feel like, yeah, you know what? I think I can make this video today, or I think I can clean the kitchen. And I think that's like, it's motivational in a way that inspires. You know, if you think of what the legacy of Rocky, it's like almost him running up the steps, and it's like, yeah, he did it. You didn't think you could run up the steps. And that's almost like a fucking weight loss commercial if you really think about it. But it's not just that he ran up the steps, it's that like, you know, these characters, you know what they've been through, you want to watch them succeed. And the end thing isn't just them fighting an action sequence, because that's the third act. I mean, in a sense it is, because you know that's coming, but you get to that point and you know that he's going to hopefully triumph, and how is he going to do it? And the suspense is there, and you know that it represents something to Creed. You knew from the first film it sells something that like, this is where he works out his trauma, this is where he works out these things, and he needs to show this guy that he cannot do this to everyone. I think seeing a bully, a troll, someone from your past that's there to knock you down. Everyone has a family member who will say something shitty when you're trying to do something new with your life, or do something different, and it sort of knocks you down for a little bit. And I think that is the overall appeal and the motivation of these films, and I think Michael B. Jordan gets that, but I don't think in this film he simplified it as much as maybe Stallone did in his directorial efforts. I think he's like sure, you accomplished this, but that is not it. It is not a complete happy ending. The slate is not wiped clean, but he still has his family, and he's still going to get through it, and it's all going to work out in the end. And there's something, I think, especially, it's interesting when these films started right around the Trump era, and they've kind of increased in popularity almost, the Creed films. I do think that has something to do with it. As we've hit harder and harder times, you can believe that, you know, just like Creed and just like Rocky before him, maybe you can run up that steps. Maybe you can prove, you know, you're not a mistake, or you were supposed to be here, or you can prove that you were supposed to be here, and you can achieve what you've always wanted to. I think it's the belief that maybe things can work out for you, and it's wonderful to sort of see this franchise completely understand why people, in a sense, sort of need these films and need this franchise and have that attachment to it. And it's wonderful to see dramas that get what we need from them, but also are able to mess with it and recontextualize it and understand how that can grow both artistically and with us as the audience. So if you've seen Creed 3 and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.